So John Jones has retired, and one of the more complicated legacies in the history of mixed martial arts comes to a close. We are going to take the retirement seriously, at least for now. I do think that there is a world where he can be brought back out of this, I would suggest. So, what is the legacy? Well, let's start at the beginning. I remember, like I think a lot of people, the introduction for John Jones for me was the Sherdog Radio Network, and you hear Jack Encarnacion talk about, hey, there's this kid out here in Boston, and he's kind of better than everyone, and better than a lot of people I've seen at this point, and he's got brothers in the NFL, so maybe keep an eye on this kid. And then he bursts onto the scene in the UFC in such a gigantic way. And the only way he could be stopped was he was kicking someone's ass too much with the 12-6 elbows on Mark Hamill and landing those shots that way. And that ends up with him getting disqualified in that fight and losing the undefeated record. But aside from that, he is just running through everybody, just dominant wins, and he's getting veterans on this route to building up now for a obviously a title challenger run. And then you really do, like, it is storybook, and it is all like, this is how you would script building up a young star in combat sports, where you have a little bit of buzz, and then he breaks onto the scene, and it is dominant win. Frustrating setback, albeit while he is still looking great, but then dominant win. Like, this is one of the things when the UFC was first really hitting the scene, that they were talking about, and it was a lot of it coming from wrestling fans. It's, you can't really build stars in combat sports because you can't control who wins or loses. So you build up these guys all this way, and then it's a fist fight. Things can happen. And so it is tough to build these guys up. But this was like it was scripted, honestly. And I'm not suggesting it was, but it was like it was scripted, where you have just John Jones, and it's just like progressively getting more and more impressive as he is going on, and he is getting put over by the veterans to kind of pass that torch and stuff like that. Like, it was very pro wrestling-esque, and it leads to a very big night on pay-per-view where he is facing Ryan Bader, and those two at the time, they were on this collision course, and it was the two big light heavyweight prospects going head to head. And I just, even looking at that, I don't know if that happens now with what we know about, like, building up stars and trying to build up contenders in divisions and stuff like that. I think those two guys would get pretty winnable fights and then be kind of next in line. But the fact that they met before a championship fight really does show where the matchmaking process was at the time and the type of matchups we were getting at that point. And John Jones, again, dominates this guy. And it was one of the first times where he dominates in the fashion of the opponent's strength. Like, Ryan Bader is trying to wrestle him, but John Jones just wrestles him better and then does like a leapfrog back behind him, locks in a choke, and that's all she wrote, and he gets the win. And then coming out of that, you have the storybook movie moment where Shogun Rua, 2 months from now, is now without an opponent at UFC 128, and they need a challenger in the weight class that he just showed he's the best in. And so you have Joe Rogan surprising him with a title opportunity in the cage, and this kid just melts down as dreams are coming true right in front of everybody. And so it builds up where you have this legend of the sport, but not like legend of the sport, but still viewed as in his prime, and still in his prime, coming off of a couple of fights with Lyoto Machida, and proving that he is not only the best right now at 205 pounds, but one of the greatest of all time in the sport of mixed martial arts, and has this historic run through Pride Fighting Championship, winning one of the more stacked Grand Prix in the sport's history, moving into the UFC, solidifying his status as one of the best in this weight class, getting that championship, and now you are putting him in there with this kid. And it is just, I remember at the time thinking, look, if anyone's beating John Jones, it's Shogun, because of how well-rounded he is, and I just think this is a step too far for him. And John Jones looked ready for that. But before you get into this legendary matchup, the day of, he goes out and stops a purse robbery. Someone is just stealing from a lady in New Jersey, I believe it was, and he notices it, tracks the guy down by foot, and keeps him in a submission hold until the police arrive. Like, this is actually Superman at this point. And then that night, he goes out in the biggest fight of his life and dominates. An absolute legend. And so the meteoric rise is complete for Jon Jones, and he is the champion at 205 pounds. We will get into where this gets messy here in just a sec, but I do want to remind you that you can follow Couch Potato Diary, all the goings on with me on social media. I am at Primetime Klein on X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, and Blue Sky. So now he is the champion, and now he continues to dominate. And you see, like, you go over his resume, and there is no questioning anything about it. Like, you can go, people will poke holes in the GSP resume and stuff like that. And at the time, those were just the best challengers, and he was running through them. It's not like he was ducking anyone. It was number one contender after number one contender. With Jon Jones, it is number one contender after number one contender, and it is legend after legend after legend. And you look back on it and it's like, oh, all these guys, it's post-prime, a lot of these guys. It was not. Maybe it was the last fight of their prime, and I do think there was something to the level that Jon Jones was at and beating these guys. I think that there was a little bit of he broke a lot of them, and so they weren't the same coming out of fights against Jon Jones. Like, a lot of these guys were, it was toward the tail end of their peak, or maybe just a little bit after it, but they were still very close to what they were at their prime. And so, you cannot take anything away from Jon Jones. It is the legacy, the resume of all resumes. There is not a doubt in my mind that's the best resume in the history of the UFC with what he was able to accomplish against legend after legend after legend. And it's big rivalry and big rivalry. And this is where you start to see some of the cracks. Because as I am describing it, they're like fight fans, like the hardcore MMA fans were in on it. I think, for the most part. I'll say I was in on it. Because, like, this guy is just, he's better than anything we have ever seen. This is video game stuff that he was doing. And it was the talk of, like, this is the next evolution of mixed martial arts fighters. Guys who can wrestle and also strike at this elite level. And he is going out and he is besting the best in the world at what they're best at. No one was doing that at that point, but he was. And so you had a group of fans who were like, look, this guy is this good. What are we doing here? And there was a lot of people who were like, it just seems fake. It seems phony. And there was a little bit of that there where, like, he is doing all these things and he's still trying to be this buttoned up, nice guy with everything. And you have Rashad Evans, his former training partner, come out, and it's the thing that really, I think, put it over the edge with Jon Jones. It's not just that he goes out and wins all these fights, but now you have this marketable rivalry with a former teammate and his old camp, the one that that Jones was brought into, turns its back on Rashad, in theory. And now he has to go start a new gym and do all these different things. And so Rashad comes into the cage and challenges Jones on a couple of nights. And you have Jon Jones saying he's ruined my special night twice now. And there's just all these things where it's just like, you are acting like you think you should be acting. Right? Like, there was, even with us who were believing in him, there was a little bit of, boy, it seems like this guy's wearing a mask in some way, shape, or form. It really does. And there would just be little signs of that kind of coming out. And just every speech that he had, it came across like he was acting. And it came across like we didn't really know who the real Jon Jones was. You know, I think there's a certain degree of that with a lot of stars now. Like, for me, I have got to the point where I'm appreciating LeBron, and I'm not suggesting that LeBron has done any of the stuff that Jones has done, but I am appreciating LeBron, but there has always been this is a facade, and everything he does is just what he thinks he's supposed to do. That was the same here with Jones, where it felt like we weren't at that point with AI yet, but it felt like you typed into AI, just act like a champion. And it is like, well, this is what I am supposed to do now. And then you'd get moments where he chokes out Lyoto Machida and just drops him like a thud to the ground and has some of these other moments. And then you don't really get, I think, the full sense of it until you start having a Daniel Cormier rivalry. And that is where I think he finally kind of embraced this heel nature of himself. And it was also at that time where you start to have a lot of the controversies that come along with John Jones and a lot of the problems that he was having. And I'm probably mixing up the timeline for, how I want it to be. But there is no question that, like, at some point, it is just like, okay, a switch has flipped and this guy is actually showing now what his true colors really, really are. And because again, there were signs, like there's eye pokes that are going on in some of these fights, and he's the first one who was starting with the oblique kicks, and it's like, boy, that seems like a real nasty thing to do in a fight. And so you're starting to get all of these different things, and then the nasty really does start to come out, and you start to see that this guy who's trying to be built up, again, to use pro wrestling terms, this guy who's being built up as a babyface might actually have some heel tendencies. And then you start to get the legal problems. 2015, there is a hit and run. He was sought after, or was sought in connection with a hit and run on April 27th, 2015. Allegedly, he ran a red light, crashed into a rental car. He allegedly fled the crash on foot, leaving an injured pregnant woman behind in the vehicle. There was maybe a bit of a rumor that it happened, and then he comes back to get his drugs, and then he runs away again. So there was those sorts of things going on. 2021, a day after he's inducted into the Hall of Fame for his fight with Alex Gustafsson, police were called to Caesar's Palace in Vegas, responding to a domestic incident, and so there is an arrest that happens with that. There are other legal troubles that he had. There was a DWI in 2012. There was a charge in July of 2019. He was charged with battery for an alleged incident in April of 2019 involving a cocktail waitress at a strip club in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He was arrested then in 2020 for that. In 2024, there was an allegation that a drug tester, Crystal Martinez, was assaulted and had her life threatened by John Jones. And then just a few days ago, just moments after he retired, there was criminal summons filed in New Mexico accusing Jones of a misdemeanor charge for allegedly fleeing the scene of a traffic accident. That also involved him leaving behind a heavily intoxicated other party. So there's all of that going on. There's also the drug tests that are happening. January 6, 2015, it was announced that Jones failed a drug test prior to UFC 182. They didn't stop him from participating in it because I think that was the one where there was a... Oh no, this one was the cocaine. That was a cocaine one that he tests positive for. And so I'm not a cocaine addict by any means, or even a frequent user. I just made a really dumb decision and got caught with my pants down in the whole thing. Also, prior to that, Jones's testosterone levels were considered alarmingly low. And so you have some suspicions that he is using a masking agent for some of these things. And so there is that. You have UFC 200. He tests positive for another substance, so he gets pulled from that fight against Daniel Cormier, leading Cormier to have to fight Anderson Silva. UFC 214 in August of 2017, he was flagged for potential doping violation by USADA, stemming from a test sample that was collected on July 28th, one day before his rematch against Daniel Cormier. He tested positive for Turinabol, a anabolic steroid, and was placed in a provisional suspension as a result of the positive drug test. It was overturned to a no contest. UFC 232, Jones became eligible to fight again in August 28th, 2018. He was scheduled to fight Alex Gustafsson at UFC 232 in Las Vegas on December 29th. However, after further inconsistencies arose with his drug test on December 23rd, he was not granted license to compete in Nevada. And so to get around these, the UFC actually shifted events to go into places that would sanction John Jones to fight. And you would have it was like a grain of rice in a swimming pool, the amount of steroids he had in his system and blibbity blobbity blue. And one of the ones in there, it was a The alarmingly low testosterone was, I guess they said from a male enhancement product that you get from a gas station. Like there was just all these different things that were happening, and so you have this incredibly talented human being. And you're trying to tell this like Superman rags to riches story, and then on the other side of it, that was a lot that I just ran through off of his Wikipedia page, where it was maybe not in all of the best circumstances going into that. And then through all of that, he kind of just becomes a dick. You know, like he is talking down to people a lot, especially on social media. There is a lot in his stuff with Daniel Cormier that just makes it seem like, oh, this is just not a good dude, you know? And so you have, while all this is going on, there is still like some pretty strong fights happening for him at big moments. And every time he gets suspended, he comes back and it's right back into the title picture. Because how could you not? Because he's obviously the best 205-pound fighter in the world at that point. And then all of that was building up through all of this, and you just get layoff after layoff and problem after problem, and it just becomes so very frustrating. And so to go back and look at the resume, it is such a wild ride when you see, like, after the Shogun fight, he beats Rampage, Lyoto Machida, Rashad Evans, Vitor Belfort, Chael Sonnen, Alex Gustafsson in the fight of forever, Glover Teixeira, Daniel Cormier, and then there's a break, and then you get into Ovince St. Preux and stuff like that. But then after that, it's Daniel Cormier, Alex Gustafsson, and then we get into kind of the back part of the career where there are some fights that are a little bit closer than maybe they needed to be, and some that you could maybe even argue that he should have lost. And so you run through this, and you see this title run that he goes on. 2011, he gets into 4 fights because of the quick turnaround from February to March with Ryan Bader and Shogun Rua. And then he fights again in September and then in December. 2012, we fight a couple of times, but as mentioned, there's legal thing pops up a little bit, but we have worked through that. And now he has one of the greatest fights of all time with Alex Gustafsson. But then we get, okay, well, it's one fight in 2014. Okay, it's one fight in 2015, and now more legal things are coming up. And it's one fight in 2016, and it's not one we really wanted against Ovince St. Preux, and he probably should have beat him in a bigger way anyway, but then he is later stripped because he tests positive. And then he goes into a fight again for the light heavyweight championship against Daniel Cormier, and it gets overturned because he tests positive again. But then he comes back, and he wins the UFC light heavyweight championship. And it's like, okay, we've had a lot of legal issues, we've had a lot of tests, but my guy is back. We got John Jones back. And then the light heavyweight division hasn't necessarily progressed in the way that you would love, and so he is beating Anthony Smith, who just retired recently. A good career, but this is not on the level of who we were talking about before. Thiago Santos, Dominic Reyes. Like, there's just not this next level of guy in these. And, like, in the Smith fight, there is a deduction of points because of an illegal knee that goes along with all the eye pokes that you see and all the oblique kicks that become popular. But at the time, it's like, boy, that just seems kind of gnarly to do that to a person, right? And so you get that. And then, again, all of the legal troubles. And he comes back in 2023, and he wins the heavyweight championship of the world. And so that happens in March. While this is happening, Francis Ngannou had just left because there was so much talk of Jones coming up to heavyweight, fighting Francis Ngannou, and it is the fight of all fights. And we will see if this, like, again, honestly, Francis Ngannou, the story of him is what the UFC wanted John Jones to be all along, where you have him coming from literally nothing, having to claw his way out of some desperate situations, just happening to find a boxing gym in France, and he becomes a world champion. And there was all the talk of John Jones against him, and it never happens. It never happens to the point where Ngannou leaves, and the second he's gone, Jones is heavyweight again. Or a heavyweight now for the first time. And now he's active and he's going for the heavyweight championship. And he wins it. And it's not a competitive fight at all. He beats the shit out of Cyril Gane and just absolutely destroys that guy. And it's just like, okay, well, that's cool. Like, he's heavyweight champ. Great. Another virtuoso performance. But it's not what we should have had. And so you just have a little bit of a And then we get, coming up in November of 2023, it is going to be Madison Square Garden. It's going to be John Jones against Stipe Miocic. And we're like, you know what? This is not the fight we want. Stipe's been inactive for a long time. You got Tom Aspinall, who is on the rise. We're still pissed about the Francis Ngannou thing, but Stipe was the best heavyweight in UFC history, so we will let this one slide this time. And then it doesn't happen because of this, that, and the other thing. And we have to wait a whole goddamn year for these two guys to fight, for Jon Jones to beat the shit out of Stipe, finish it spectacularly, and then not fight again. And that was November 16th, 2024. And just this week, he retires and vacates the belt. And so this whole run where we could have had some amazing dream fights is just wasted with Ngannou in a different promotion and a potential star having to sit on the sideline for a year and a half, just trying to get this giant fight that could change lives. And it comes crashing down like my microphone just did. It is so frustrating when you look at all of it. And so to kind of just fully bring in the whole legacy of Jon Jones, it is a very tricky one to maneuver. Because on the one hand, you see everything he has accomplished, and it is wild to suggest that this was a waste of potential in any way. But then you see the issues and everything that was left behind, and it is tough to say that he maximized everything too. And so it's a tough legacy to follow, because some of the stuff that he is accused of and has been arrested for is just absolutely repulsive behavior. And then from a GOAT in MMA standpoint, I have very few criteria that will disqualify you from it. But testing positive for stuff is one of them. And look, that is not to say I think everyone else on my Mount Rushmore or GOAT list or anything like that is fully clean. It's just they were smart enough to not get caught. And Jon Jones certainly was not that at several different points in his career. So I will gladly say that he has the best resume of any fighter who has existed in this sport. And I will gladly say he is the most talented fighter I have ever seen in combat sports. And you can see some of the grays popping up. And if I took my hat off, you'd see even more. I've been watching this stuff for a long time, and I've been studying the stuff that came before me too. There is no one who reaches the talent of this guy. And to be perfectly honest with you, there aren't many that even come close. We are talking about 1% of 1% when we are talking about the air that Jon Jones breathes when it comes to the top of combat sports. But given everything that goes on with his legacy, it just feels gross to call this guy the greatest of all time in this sport. And there is shame on the UFC for allowing a lot of that to happen and just continually just allow that. There has to be a better word for it, but just continually feeding into this thing and not holding this guy accountable at any point. And now you see what happens with the higher ups at the Ultimate Fighting Championship and some of the other decisions you see. And it really is, just in thinking about it, he is kind of the GOAT the UFC deserves, right? Like you have a incredibly talented, incredibly popular guy, and it got a lot, but it should have been so much more, and it should have been that in a much less gross way. And it just kind of feels like that is kind of the champion that the Ultimate Fighting Championship really did deserve. So maybe at the end of the day, it was the perfect relationship in the worst ways, and sometimes the best ways possible. So those are my thoughts on the legacy, having lived through it from tip to tail with Jon Jones.